By the late 1990s, Edmonton's Asian gang scene was heating up, and Long Duy Crazy Jimmy Hoang and his crew, the Crazy Jimmies, were right in the middle of it. They were locked in a bitter turf war with the rival Trang family gang, each side fighting for control of the city's drug trade. The conflict wasn't subtle. Shootings, car-to-car attacks, and other acts of violence became a grim part of daily life in parts of Edmonton. This wasn't just low-level street crime. It involved two groups that were sophisticated in extortion and narcotics. The Trang family were allegedly a well-organized drug network. On the other side, the Crazy Jimmies were a crew led by a man whose reputation for unpredictability was one of his greatest weapons. The Crazy Jimmies were known for their aggressive tactics, often targeting rival members in public, sending a clear message about who controlled the streets. This ongoing feud fueled a spike in gang-related incidents across the city, drawing the attention of law enforcement. The violence wasn't just about money. It was about reputation, power, and survival. A dangerous game that ultimately shaped the violent landscape of Edmonton at the turn of the millennium. By the summer of 1999, Edmonton's gang violence had reached a troubling level. A national organized crime report ranked the city among Canada's leading centers for gang activity. In August, the Times-Colonist reported that Edmonton was leading the country in gang-related shootings. Criminal Intelligence Service Canada would later describe 1999 as a year of escalating violence connected to Asian-based organized crime in Western Canada. In Edmonton, authorities reported that two rival gangs involved in the drug trade had become locked in a shooting conflict that left 2 people dead and 3 others wounded. Police Chief John Lindsay acknowledged the pattern publicly. Asian-based crime groups, especially Vietnamese and Chinese groups, were expanding northward from Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. Edmonton's drug market had become contested ground. One of the city's most notorious figures was Long Duy Crazy Jimmy Hoang, a 28-year-old Vietnamese Canadian gangster. Even at just 28, Hoang was a well-known Edmonton gang leader, widely regarded as a father figure among younger Vietnamese Canadian gang members. They gave him the street name Crazy, partly because he loved to party and do drugs, and partly to distinguish him from Dirty Jimmy and Little Jimmy, 2 other players involved in Edmonton's gang scene. He earned his nickname both for his reckless partying and his wild reputation, a man who, according to friends, would stop at no limits to have fun. Hoang was a key member of an Asian organized crime group competing for control of Edmonton's drug trade with the rival Trang family gang. According to the source who spoke with reporters, Jimmy wasn't the top of the pyramid. Though respected, insiders said there were 3 or 4 figures above him in the criminal hierarchy. Hoang's role was as an enforcer, provider, and mentor, someone who made sure everybody had money and food and watched out for people within his circle. Friends described him as protective of younger recruits, but also increasingly paranoid and desperate due to the ongoing gang war and heavy cocaine use. Once a regular at karaoke bars and drinking spots, Crazy Jimmy had become far more paranoid in recent months, and even his closest friends said he wasn't the same anymore. Yet even then, people said he was known for still looking out for others. The source who spoke to the Edmonton Journal was quoted saying, "Everybody looked up to him. He made sure everybody had money and food. He acts like a father figure to some of the younger kids. He had a reputation for watching out for people. If anybody was going to do something to you, he would let you know because of his street intelligence." According to Edmonton police, Crazy Jimmy had a history of arrests and a long criminal record, including cocaine trafficking, assault, and uttering threats. One early charge in 1993 alleged he had threatened a city police constable. Because of that history, the source said, police attention was constant. When you're known in the underworld, you get stopped, questioned, hassled. And Hoang, they said, didn't have a habit of threatening cops, but he wasn't surprised anymore when it happened. Although he didn't usually target officers, he harbored a deep resentment toward law enforcement due to repeated stops and surveillance. Towards the end of 1999, Crazy Jimmy had recently spent time in Calgary before returning to Edmonton. According to articles in the Edmonton Journal, Long Duy Hoang had already built a lengthy criminal record by the time he became a prominent figure in Edmonton's gang scene. Court records show he faced charges including cocaine trafficking, assault, and uttering threats. His criminal history would become another part of the growing picture surrounding the man known on the streets as Crazy Jimmy. His name appeared in multiple active investigations tied to Edmonton's Vietnamese gang conflict. In the months leading up to January 2000, Crazy Jimmy was sliding downhill fast, slowly losing control of his own organization, using crack heavily and carrying a gun everywhere he went. His roommate described him as increasingly erratic and paranoid, a state of mind that led him to lose the vital trust of his own crew and the broader Vietnamese underworld. Hoang also had a family life he kept largely out of sight. He had a girlfriend and a young child, just 2 years old, whom he deliberately kept away from the dangerous world surrounding him. The reason was simple. The gang war with the rival Trang organization was becoming increasingly vicious, and the danger was no longer something they could easily escape. Hoang was no longer the calculated leader of the 1990s. He had become a volatile liability fueled by his heavy addiction to crack cocaine. But detectives also heard a troubling account from someone who knew Hoang personally. Tran reportedly described his former roommate as a troublemaker, someone he considered dangerous enough to fear. His warning was blunt. "He's crazy. I'm scared of him." And there was another significant piece of evidence. Constable Cameron Forsty testified that a Glock belonging to Hoang, which was not registered, had been linked to 2 violent incidents in 1999. One of the first incidents happened downtown, inside a small noodle restaurant. It was supposed to be a targeted hit, a message, or maybe retaliation. During the shooting, a man was singled out, cornered inside the restaurant, and shots were fired at close range. But by sheer luck, or maybe instinct, the intended victim managed to escape. He bolted into the bathroom, locked the door, and survived as gunfire tore through the space behind him. Not long after, another violent confrontation erupted, this one in traffic near 100th Street and 80th Avenue. A suspect vehicle was sprayed with bullets during a dispute between Hoang's circle and rival Vietnamese groups. When the shell casings were recovered, in both cases the forensics lined up perfectly. Police would later determine that the same firearm had been used. For investigators, it added another layer to the growing picture surrounding Hoang and the increasingly violent world he was becoming associated with. Then, on August 18, 1999, the violence claimed another life. 18-year-old Hoang Tran was stopped at a red light near Tellis Field when another vehicle pulled alongside him. A man reportedly jumped from the car and opened fire, striking Tran with at least 6 rounds from a handgun. Police believed the killing was connected to a violent war between rival organized drug gangs, part of a string of at least 6 shootings that had already rocked Edmonton that year. But the violence didn't end with Tran's death. A cab driver who witnessed the shooting was reportedly followed by gang members and eventually left Edmonton. More than 2 decades later, Hoang Tran's murder remains unsolved. Before he was killed, Tran had himself been acquitted of a murder charge stemming from a separate shooting in West Edmonton. Now, an 18-year-old was dead, and police were increasingly confronting a criminal underworld where drugs, guns, and violent rivalries were becoming intertwined. Much of that violence was playing out between competing Asian Canadian gangs, as Edmonton's drug trade became increasingly organized and increasingly dangerous. By the beginning of 2000, the city was approaching a critical point, and on the night of January 5th, the violence would converge on one of Edmonton's most notorious figures, Long Duy Crazy Jimmy Hoang. The final night of Long Duy Crazy Jimmy Hoang's life was chaotic and violent. On January 5, 2000, police attempted to pull him over to investigate a gun complaint. Panicked and high on crack cocaine, Hoang refused to stop, racing through West Edmonton streets at speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour. His friend, Hoang Tran, sat in the passenger seat, begging him to stop, even grabbing his arm and saying, "I told him life was more important." But Hoang ignored him. Instead, Crazy Jimmy accelerated. What followed was a 14-block pursuit through Edmonton's streets. According to eyewitnesses and evidence later presented at a fatality inquiry, Hoang reached speeds of up to 100 kilometers per hour, sped south on 149th Street for about 10 blocks, and then turned abruptly left onto 89th Avenue and into a quiet residential neighborhood, 3 blocks south of Candy Cane Lane. The chase ended when his Honda Accord slammed into a parked Jeep at 149th Street and 89th Avenue. The events that followed would turn this high-speed pursuit into the most consequential moment in the Crazy Jimmy story. Officers quickly surrounded the vehicle. Police say the passenger, 26-year-old Hoang, got out of the car as ordered and laid on the snowy asphalt. But Hoang was not finished. He refused to comply with the officers' orders. Rather than immediately stepping outside, Hoang chose to remain inside the car. For a brief moment, the situation appeared to be at a standstill. Officers surrounded the vehicle, weapons drawn, as they tried to determine what Hoang intended to do next. Then, amidst the chaos, Hoang suddenly made a fateful decision. Crazy Jimmy reached into his coat, pulled out a .45 caliber Glock, and swung it wildly through the air before leveling the barrel at the Edmonton police. He then fired off a single shot in the direction of the surrounding officers. In that instant, officers were forced to react to what they believed was an imminent threat. The tactical unit returned fire, unleashing approximately 30 rounds. The car's windshield and rear windows were shattered, bullets riddling the vehicle as Hoang was struck multiple times. One nearby resident, Craig Hicks, later recalled he heard what sounded like a weapon before seeing the flashing lights of police vehicles. "I opened the door and the police yelled for me to get back inside. I didn't want to be there anyway," he said. The passenger would later testify, "I told him to turn himself in. I told him to put his hands up. I couldn't do anything about it." One police officer who had emergency medical training treated the victim until the ambulance arrived. He was rushed to hospital, but despite medical efforts, he died 36 hours later from his injuries, bringing a violent chapter in Edmonton's gang history to a brutal close. Police spokesperson Chief John Lindsay confirmed that Hoang was indeed the man known as Crazy Jimmy and described him as the head of an Asian organized crime group in the city. While announcing the death of Hoang, he was quoted saying, "I can now confirm for you that the deceased who passed away this morning was in fact the person known as Crazy Jimmy, who was the head of an Asian organized crime group in the city that was engaged in competition with another group for market share in the drug business." He was declared Edmonton's first homicide victim of 2000, though police officials objected to that label, insisting the officers had acted in self-defense. Edmonton Police Association spokesman Bob Claney said, "I take offense at that. This is not a homicide. They were doing what they were trained to do." A 3-day fatality inquiry into Hoang's death concluded that the officers acted properly. Members of the tactical team, including Constable Cameron Forsty, testified that Hoang was armed and dangerous. According to the fatality inquiry, police began receiving reports that Hoang had been driving a brown Honda Accord and had been seen at various locations around Edmonton threatening people. The reports described him carrying a Glock pistol. But there was another, more serious allegation. Witnesses had also reported seeing what appeared to be a submachine gun-type weapon, suggesting that an armed gang leader was moving through the city. At approximately 6:30 p.m., police learned that Crazy Jimmy and a companion had parked the Honda Accord near 9882 155th Street and entered the property. Officers decided not to storm the house. The report says police considered that option too risky. Instead, they waited. The strategy was simple. Let the two men come out, wait for Hoang to get into his vehicle, then stop him. But when Hoang and his passenger eventually emerged from the house, the situation quickly moved beyond a controlled arrest. Detective Dennis McGady, who was a 26-year veteran of the Edmonton Police Service, testified that he could find nothing the tactical officers should have done differently in their attempt to arrest Hoang. In his assessment, the officers were acting in self-defense, and given the circumstances they faced, he described their actions as the most responsible course available to them. After the shooting, investigators turned their attention to the small bungalow where Crazy Jimmy had spent several hours before getting behind the wheel of the Honda. What they found inside would add another layer to the deadly confrontation that had just unfolded. In the basement, an Edmonton police constable found a loaded M11 machine pistol inside a sports bag. Investigators also found 2 crack cocaine pipes. The following morning, police interviewed the passenger Hoang. According to his statement, Crazy Jimmy had brought the gun into the house. Tran also said the 2 men had smoked approximately half a gram of crack cocaine before leaving to obtain more. Investigators also revealed Crazy Jimmy had allegedly told associates he wanted to have a death by cop scenario to enhance his street reputation. Edmonton police never publicly explained why the response was so overwhelming. 30 rounds fired in return for a single shot. To many observers, even at the time, it looked like overkill. But within the fatality inquiry, officers emphasized that it happened in seconds. A chaotic, close-range confrontation in the aftermath of a high-speed pursuit, with a suspect they believed was armed, unstable, and determined to shoot his way out. The tactical team argued they weren't counting rounds. They were reacting to what they perceived as an immediate, lethal threat. Judge Peter Cafaro's report found no wrongdoing by police, stating that the officers were acting not only in self-defense, but in the most responsible way possible, given the circumstances. In the end, Edmonton police were cleared of any criminal wrongdoing in the incident. In the days immediately following the shooting death of Crazy Jimmy, the neighborhood where it happened still felt scarred. The snow was packed down from police boots and tire tracks, but the impact lingered. The smashed Jeep, the riddled Honda, the echo of gunfire that had shattered what was normally a quiet West End street. All that remained at the scene were tire tracks, frozen bloodstains, broken taillights, and a few bloodied latex gloves. Residents living near the house where the chase began said the blinds are always drawn, vehicles come and go at night, and the people who live there keep to themselves. A young woman in smeared makeup, a tank top, and track pants answered the door when news reporters arrived. "Oh, I'm not supposed to talk to you," she said. "Sorry." She then closed the door, refusing to speak on the situation. Barbara Bettis, a mother of 5 young children who lived nearby, said she saw police searching the house and fears the neighborhood may be going downhill. "Most of the people here are quiet, friendly. You know, pass the cucumber over the fence in summer," said Bettis. "I don't like the idea of someone coming and getting my kid while he's on his paper route. I never even knew about the guns. I don't like it one bit." Friends and underworld sources said Hoang's death didn't come as a surprise. One associate of Crazy Jimmy would later speak to reporters from the Edmonton Sun, trying to make sense of what happened that night. He wasn't offering excuses, just insight from someone who had watched Jimmy's rise and watched his decline. He said he believed Jimmy truly felt like he had nothing left to lose, that somewhere during that chase, with the sirens closing in, the car fishtailing through the snow, his friend yelling at him to stop, Jimmy simply panicked. He got scared, the associate said. He didn't know what to do. And maybe it was true. Years of drug abuse, paranoia, and the constant pressure of the gang lifestyle had finally caught up to him. The man who once carried himself like a fearless enforcer, the one younger gang members saw as a protector, a provider, someone who always made sure everyone had money and food, was now spiraling, crack cocaine, war with rivals, arrest warrants piling up, his influence fading, his mental state unraveling. After the smoke cleared, the man who helped define an era of Edmonton's underworld was dead. In the early hours of January 12, 2000, just 4 days after Crazy Jimmy was killed in a shootout with Edmonton police, mourners gathered to say goodbye. Inside a funeral chapel, Hoang's body lay in an open casket at the front of the room. His forehead was wrapped in a scarf. His chest was covered with freshly cut flowers. The funeral service lasted approximately an hour. It was conducted entirely in Vietnamese. Most who attended were young men of Asian ancestry. They arrived dressed largely in black suits and platform shoes, carrying flowers and offering condolences to the Hoang family. At the front of the chapel, a shrine had been constructed for Hoang. It contained a photograph of him when he was younger. In the picture, he appeared vibrant and smiling. After the ceremony, a funeral procession carried Crazy Jimmy toward his final resting place. The man Edmonton knew as Crazy Jimmy was gone. He had lived dangerously. He had died violently. And his death had become another chapter in Edmonton's growing gang history. But on this morning, there were no gunshots, no police pursuit, no sirens, only prayers for peace in the afterlife. But in the vacuum of his absence, something more organized and more violent was waiting to be born. That same year, police set up a special task force to look at gang activity in August. In September, a joint operation of the RCMP and the Edmonton Police Service arrested 28 people in connection with the drug trade and Asian-based gangs. The Edmonton Police Service would later go on to say that Crazy Jimmy's death effectively decapitated one wing of the Vietnamese gang structure, temporarily halting the feud that had spilled over from the 1999 drug war and the Trang family arrests. The Edmonton Police Service credited these events, along with aggressive anti-gang enforcement, for a sharp decline in Vietnamese gang violence through the early 2000s. Hoang's fall from power illustrated the dangers of the gang lifestyle, a mix of loyalty, intimidation, and recklessness that could turn deadly at any moment. Though his death temporarily halted one of Edmonton's most violent turf wars, the underworld he left behind was far from quiet, setting the stage for future conflicts. By the late 1990s, Edmonton's criminal underworld was a turbulent and dangerous place, and few gangs were as notorious as the Trang family. For years, they had maintained a tight grip on the city's drug trade, controlling shipments, collecting debts, and enforcing their rules with brutal efficiency. But by 1999, the walls were closing in. A series of coordinated police crackdowns struck the gang hard. Over 40 members were arrested across multiple locations, bringing the full weight of Edmonton law enforcement down on the organization. The charges were serious: drug trafficking, conspiracy, and other criminal offenses, and, for the first time in years, the gang's carefully cultivated empire was under real threat. The legal process that followed was grueling. Many of the arrested members were held in the Edmonton Remand Center, facing long periods of detention while awaiting trial. Conditions in the facility added a new layer of tension. Reports of overcrowding, inadequate medical care, and allegations of racial discrimination against inmates created complications and delays. Despite these challenges, the wheels of justice continued to turn, systematically dismantling the gang's structure. But the story didn't end with arrests and courtrooms. When the Trang family's grip finally faltered, a power vacuum emerged in Edmonton's underworld. Former members and ambitious rivals quickly moved to fill the void, seeking to claim territory, influence, and control of the city's lucrative drug trade. One of the groups to rise from the ashes was the Crazy Dragons, a successor organization that absorbed former Trang members and reasserted their presence in Edmonton. The fall of the Trang family marked both an end and a beginning. It was the conclusion of one of the most formidable chapters in the city's gang history, yet it also set the stage for a new generation of criminal enterprises. The policing and legal efforts that toppled them were effective in dismantling their organization, but they could not erase the underlying demand for drugs or the networks that sustained organized crime. Edmonton's streets would remain contested ground, but the collapse of the Trang family sent a clear message. Even the most entrenched criminal empires are vulnerable. But in the world Crazy Jimmy lived in, one truth never changes. When one gangster falls, another rises to take his place. His death didn't erase the influence he'd already built or the young men he'd helped bring into that lifestyle. The players he mentored, the rivals he clashed with, and the crews shaped by his era were still out there. And with Jimmy gone, they understood something clearly. A vacuum had opened in Edmonton's underworld. A new generation was ready to step forward, ready to claim the territory he once controlled. His story ended that night on 149th Street, but the chain reaction he helped set in motion was only beginning. Today, The era of the Crazy Jimmies feels like a distant, chaotic memory. But the violence that shook Edmonton didn't just disappear. It would shape the city's gang scene for years to come. And the consequences of that era are still being felt today. You've been watching part of an ongoing investigative series from Sad Girl Productions. This documentary is based entirely on publicly available information, including archived news reports, court documents, and community sources. While every effort has been made to present this story accurately and respectfully, all events, statements, and accounts discussed in this video remain alleged unless otherwise verified through official records. The purpose of this series is to document, educate, and analyze Calgary's criminal history, not to glorify, promote, or condemn any individuals or groups involved. Viewers are reminded that many of the details shared in this episode stem from a combination of media coverage, which have not all been independently confirmed. Sad Girl Productions makes no claim of factual certainty regarding any individual's actions or involvement. All subjects discussed are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Thank you for watching.